And it's 12 o'clock. Please bear with me just a second, and I'll kick things off.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's get started. It's 12:01. Welcome everyone to our June edition of OCJN 201. And in celebration of LGBTQ plus month, Pride Month, we are hosting Josiah Robinson, who will educate and inform us on LGBTQ plus rights in Oklahoma through the lens of structural and policy analysis. He will highlight local lived experiences and affirm community legal navigation as essential support. I sent out a full bio ahead of the meeting, and I'm not going to waste any time reading that to you, but please trust me that he is an expert in this area and he'll let us know more about himself as he continues his discussion today. And he has a very impressive background, and I'm very excited to turn it over to Josiah.
Thank you, Tiffany. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here and for being community legal navigators. You serve a super important function and role in Oklahoma, so I'm very grateful for the work that each of you do. And happy Pride. Today's topic, LGBTQ plus rights in Oklahoma, uh, isn't the most exciting content, or I'm not proud about a lot of the things that I'll be sharing, but nonetheless, there are some positives, and it's important to know. We'll talk about, as Tiffany said, structural exclusion currently in Oklahoma for LGBTQ plus people. And this was the description, which is very wordy, which you also received, which I won't give too much more time to. But I will share a little bit more about my personal story, why this is important to me, and to kind of set a frame for what brought me here today. So I'm a Tulsa native. I spent the first 20-ish years of my life trying to change who I was, my sexual orientation, queerness, and attraction. And I finally decided that it was time to accept myself and come out. I had this revelation when I was in the middle of law school, and I was attending a faith-based institution that maintained discriminatory policies toward LGBTQ plus students still. Needless to say, I was terrified at the idea of coming out, uncertain about what that would mean for my good standing, well-being, my jobs, all of that. And so I spent about a year studying everything I could about LGBTQ plus policy and history and trying to learn about myself and really trying to develop the confidence that I needed to finally take this leap. And then on June 15th, 2020, the Supreme Court handed down a very big case for the community in Bostock v. Clayton County. The court held here that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protected LGBTQ plus people in the workplace from discrimination. So this case essentially added sexual orientation and interpreted sexual orientation and gender identity to be protected within employment context. This case gave me a lot of hope that things were going to get better, that my career wouldn't be as impacted by this decision to be openly queer, especially considering the environments that I was navigating. A couple weeks later, I finally got the boost that I needed. And then on another important date, June 28th, 2020, it was the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and I came out publicly online, received mixed responses, and my entire life changed after this. My career trajectory, community, everything sort of went in a totally different direction, and I had to start over. Since then, I fell into this role, sort of advocacy for LGBTQ plus people in exclusionary environments. and trying to develop creative ways to support people in some of the most hostile places. And so for the last 5 years professionally, I've been doing this work with a focus on LGBTQ plus equality, really at the intersection of research and policy. So trying to look at research, look at policy frameworks to understand what is it like right now for queer and trans people. Here's a quick roadmap of how that story will play out today. We're going to talk about LGBTQ plus rights. I had no idea what this was a few years ago. I didn't know it was even a thing until Bostock, and around the Bostock time in 2020. And so we're going to talk about what that means, define some terms, and then we'll look at policy at the federal, state, and local levels that implicate LGBTQ plus people in Oklahoma. And I'll shout out now that if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor that as I move forward. Tiffany will also monitor, so happy to try to answer questions contemporaneously. After we look at some of the policies, we'll talk about the direct correlation to mental health disparities and some referral options for you as you're navigating with clients. So LGBTQ plus rights, what does it mean, and how are we using that in this term for this presentation? First, when I say LGBTQ plus, I am referring to Two-Spirit, 2S plus, queer and trans people, and all gender and sexual minorities. So I'll use those terms interchangeably, and I won't jump into any definitions there. Other trainings are better for that. And rights, we're referring to legal protections, institutional access, and conditions for human dignity that allow LGBTQ plus people to work, rent or own a home, access healthcare, raise families, attend school safely, carry accurate identity documents, and participate in civic life without discrimination, violence, or erasure. So essentially touches almost every part of life, moving through the world and growing up, all of the things that make us human. LGBTQ plus rights in some way kind of touch on that. So this training will explore how those protections and conditions are manifesting right now in Oklahoma and kind of look at it through a national context. Structural stigma, I'll use this word or structural exclusion a lot. I'm referring to the societal level conditions, cultural norms, and institutional policies that constrain opportunities, resources, and well-being of the stigmatized. So anything kind of top-down, high level. This is operating through law, policy, institutions, whether intentionally or not. All structural stigma can be objectively verified through stigmatic legislation that is proposed and passed, and then representation and politics in elected office. Minority stress theory is a framework for which I'm kind of thinking about a lot of these issues, which is the stigma, prejudice, and discrimination that creates a hostile social environment for LGBTQ plus people, producing stress above and beyond general life stressors and driving measurably higher rates of mental health disparities, suicidality, and adverse health outcomes. So essentially, and this applies to anybody who's a part of a minority group, basically your exclusion in society and the social hostility that you face, directly correlates to mental health and well-being. This theory was developed by Dr. Elon Meyer at the Williams Institute at UCLA. And he also talks about, again, how this produces measurable mental health outcomes and harms and the ways in which it's clinically and politically disenfranchising. So who are we talking about numbers wise in Oklahoma? Well, sometimes this data is kind of hard to come by for all the reasons you can imagine around fears of disclosure of identity in Oklahoma, but estimates put LGBTQ plus people at around 5.5%, all the way up to 13% of the population. So that comes to about 165,000 LGBTQ plus adults in Oklahoma, up to maybe closer to 270,000 for some of those other estimates. And of course, you have higher pockets of the community in bigger cities like Tulsa and Oklahoma City, which I believe a lot of y'all are based in. Nationally, there's a lot of LGBTQ plus people too, and also experiencing incredible backlash at the national and federal level. Before I dive into a lot of this, I will say that what's happening in the United States in the last couple of years is not isolated to the US. there is a global trend of backlash and kind of rollback of enforcement and inclusion for LGBTQ plus people across the globe, and especially trans people. What we are seeing in the US, though, is that our policies do carry a lot of weight and it does impact global trends as well. Since 2025, under the new administration, the federal government has taken more than a dozen actions affecting LGBTQ plus protections, healthcare access, and civil rights enforcement. So I won't dive into all of these specifically, but I wanted to list them here for you to see to get an idea of just how much is going into this disenfranchisement right now and the ways in which it is impacting so many areas of life. A lot of them are complex policies that have implications or ramifications beyond what we currently know. Five of the executive orders passed in the first several days of the new administration did target LGBTQ plus people in some way. All of those were challenged. Some of those had preliminary injunctions obtained, so temporary processes to block enforcement pending litigation. Currently, also at the federal level, in 2026, the White House, Senate, and the House are all in control of people who have been openly hostile to LGBTQ plus people. And so all of that has a trickle-down effect to state legislatures, and all of us who are watching the news. In this list, you can see all sorts of, again, healthcare, military, data collection, HIV care, Title IX, enforcement mechanisms, all sorts of things that impact LGBTQ plus people day to day have come under fire. At the Supreme Court level, we are also seeing challenges to existing issues in the last couple of years. Here's two of several that we've seen. I'm just highlighting these two to show, again, how gender affirming care for minors is become a big conversation, as well as conversion therapy for minors by licensed therapists. Both of these cases had harmful outcomes and are creating major impacts that are kind of rippling across the country right now and will continue to as we navigate some of those findings or those that are still in litigation. Here we'll kind of shift gears a little bit and talk more about Oklahoma, which you all probably know well, and going to kind of paint Oklahoma within kind of this national context again. As you can see here, Oklahoma is losing or winning, according to some people who want this to take place, but unfortunately, LGBTQ plus policy scores very negatively here. As you can imagine, in this upper right-hand quadrant, you'll see all of these red-coded states that have negative scores. These scores for this framework is based on 49 points by the Movement Advancement Project, covering several different categories, some of which we've hinted at: relationship and parental recognition, non-discrimination protections, religious exemptions, LGBTQ plus youth, healthcare, criminal justice, and identity documents. Specifically in Oklahoma, efforts to target transgender people, and under the gender identity score, it receives a highly negative score. But Oklahoma ranks 41 out of 50, so I guess that's something to, it's not last place. So I guess that's something to recognize. We are last in several other metrics, as we'll explore later. So policy here is hostile at best. Here's some of the examples where there are current gaps in state policy in Oklahoma that impacts gay and trans people. I'll read through this and won't dive into too much, but again, the goal here being to show how widespread and interconnected some of this policy is. Oklahoma does not have any statewide non-discrimination protections based on sexual orientation or gender identity in employment, housing, or public accommodations. There are no statewide hate crime protections for sexual orientation or gender identity, no conversion therapy ban for minors or adults, no gender neutral identity documents, no school non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus students, no Medicaid coverage for gender affirming care, no confirmatory adoption for same-sex couples, no voluntary acknowledgement of parentage for same-sex couples, no non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus parents in adoption or foster care, no legal recognition for parents using assisted reproduction, and no inclusive state family leave laws covering same-sex partners or non-biological parents. By comparison, there are states that do maintain these policies. Active restrictions in Oklahoma include bans on gender affirming care for minors, public funds for gender transition for minors or adults, ban on gender neutral markers on state documents, ban on transgender girls and women and girls in women's sports, ban on transgender people using facilities consistent with gender in K through 12 and prisons, a requirement of court order and surgical attestation to change gender markers, a mandate that schools adopt a policy that teach homosexual activity is primarily responsible for HIV, which is medically inaccurate, an adoption of agency religious exemptions that allow agencies to refuse LGBTQ plus placements, and broad religious exemptions law. All of these, of course, add to hostility and challenges with people navigating healthcare and family planning. The legislature is incredibly hostile to LGBTQ plus people in Oklahoma. We are leading the way here, unfortunately, where Oklahoma introduced more anti-LGBTQ plus bills than any other state in 2024. Between 2023 to 2025, Oklahoma introduced 891 anti-bills, approximately 10% of the entire national total. The state has become a testing ground for a lot of these of the most extreme policies. And thankfully, though there have been so many hundreds of bills introduced, most of them do not become law. So few of them actually become law. A lot of them do pass various chambers and then get held up somewhere through the procedural process and then don't become law. Um, so also it could be worse, but it's also horrible. In 2026, this year's legislative session, we did see four bills that I'll quickly highlight of some that did pass, specifically targeting trans people and family planning again. HB 1032 repealed administrative rules that permitted Oklahomans to update gender markers on state driver's license. HB 1225 banned gender marker corrections on birth certificates. SB 904 banned public funds, including Medicaid or Sooner Care, for gender affirming care at any age and barred the use of state property for that care. HB 3586 prohibited foster and adoption denial based on unwillingness to support a child's gender transition. There was a lot more that were introduced that did not become law. And these are very quick summaries of these bills. So if you are interested, please feel free to check them out yourself for details. Here's a quote from Tulsa artist and organizer talking about this climate. If you hear over and over and over that you're worthless, that you shouldn't exist, we're trying to eradicate you, that's rough. Well, now the government's saying that I shouldn't exist, and my parents tell me I shouldn't be this way. And so then what other options do I have, right? This quote was pulled from an article in the Tulsa Flyer talking about the current social and political climate. This climate, of course, correlates with the mental health disparities that we've talked about earlier. This data was from 2024. As you can imagine, since so much has transpired in the last 2 years, since 2025, I unfortunately expect that these numbers are worse than they are, even though they're heartbreaking. Most trans and non-binary youth in Oklahoma have seriously considered suicide in the past year. Most youth have experienced anxiety, depression, and were unable to access affirming mental health care when they needed it. 14% of the youth had attempted suicide in the past year, and 66% experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in the past year. I quick will just say that many LGBTQ plus students in Oklahoma, from what I've heard from folks who are in schools or teachers, is that students are leaving public schools because of the bullying, because it's become so bad. Um, Personally, in the last year to 2 years, I've experienced harassment, discrimination, both online and in person in Oklahoma. Those incidents have increased in the last 2 years. So since 2024, the same goes for a lot of friends and people that I know in the community. So both from my personal experience and the anecdotes that I hear, things are getting worse. We're feeling it in the streets, online, the way we navigate the world, and that's a thing to be aware of. Unfortunately, these disparities are not new. In 2019, Tulsa-specific data showed that almost 60% of LGBTQ plus youth reported suicidal ideation, approximately 3 times the national average. 66% reported bullying or harassment at school. In 2025, I was able to support a person completing their PhD dissertation at Oklahoma State University. Together, we helped build on some of this research through PRISM Project, an organization focused on LGBTQ plus research in the Tulsa and Oklahoma area. What that data revealed was that, as you can expect, these conditions are getting worse, specifically for adults year over year. We also found in that research that the more that we are being exposed to structural discrimination as LGBTQ plus people in Oklahoma, the more that we are experiencing mental health distress. So every time we turn on the news, open our phones, scroll online, this constant bombardment with these attacks, which of course there are several dozens that I've already listed today, it is stressful at best. And it is, yeah, and we're seeing the research to show now that the ways it's getting worse. Politically, it's also the public health and well-being is suffering because of it. Talking about structural stigma, we also consider cultural norms. And so we look at public opinion research. And in Oklahoma, on every measure of public support for LGBTQ rights, Oklahoma ranks at or near the bottom of all 50 states. This didn't surprise me. I have lived in other states on both coasts and have spent the last few years in Oklahoma. And I think many of us, and myself, I'll speak for myself, can feel the lack of support and the microaggressions moving through the world. Here, though same-sex marriage is now supported by a majority in every state, in Oklahoma, it's only about 50% of the population that support a gay couple's right to be married, which is 46th of all 50 states. So not last here. 57% of Oklahomans, a majority, do support non-discrimination laws, but that is the lowest of all 50 states. And 43% oppose religious-based refusals of service to LGBTQ plus people, which is also the lowest of all 50 states. So not easy to be an LGBTQ plus person here when, in a lot of ways, most of the people that you may encounter are not supportive of your inclusion in getting married or not being discriminated against for accessing housing, employment, or public accommodations. Nonetheless, about half are supportive. So I also suspect that a lot of that support is more heavily centralized within our urban areas of Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Here's a quote to kind of highlight family planning challenges. As a gay couple trying to start a family in Oklahoma, our journey is built entirely on contingency plans. What if this embryo fertilization doesn't work? What if the laws on surrogacy and parental recognition change in the middle of our process? What if the public schools won't acknowledge us as two dads? Getting both of our names recognized as legal parents and not just guardians has felt arbitrary, dependent on which county court or state administrator we encounter. We don't know of any companies in Oklahoma taking any meaningful stances on fertility planning for same-sex couples, no embryo creation benefits, no surrogacy benefits to offset a $200,000 process. We also worry many of our marital rights could disappear overnight if Obergefell is overturned. This was a quote that somebody had shared with me this week, describing the process that they've been navigating as a gay couple trying to start a family in Oklahoma. Um, as this shows, almost everything is working against LGBTQ plus people and same-sex couples trying to start families, and that certainly takes a toll. At the local level, there are some protections that exist. So we mentioned that there are no statewide protections for non-discrimination. However, there are some municipalities that have passed partial protections, with Norman passing protections across all categories, protecting approximately 3% of the state of Oklahoma. These protections show up in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Public accommodations are places that are open to the general public for business. So think hotels, restaurants, bowling alleys, clothing stores, places like that. So in Norman is the only place where you cannot be denied these services just because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. In Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Lindsay, there are protections in housing that protects against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. This is very important for everyone here to know, perhaps one of the most important slides to note, as a lot of you do work with clients that, of course, face questions around housing, accessing public accommodations, and employment. If for any reason you recognize that maybe one of these issues have been, if you spot that there might be an issue here or an experience of discrimination, report it either way. So even if you see a red X here, it does not hurt to go ahead and still pursue enforcement mechanisms and refer out to specific LGBTQ plus and social organizations as soon as possible when discrimination does transpire. Just because there may not be a specific explicit local enforcement does not mean that there might not be other ways to get some sort of justice or have some action taken. In Tulsa, for these issues, for just some historical context, community members have been advocating to the Human Rights Commission in the city of Tulsa to expand protections to include um, protections based on this community for over 50 years. So it's not that we haven't known that this is a gap. It's that there's been 50 years of advocacy, and unfortunately, it's been unsuccessful, with the exception that housing protections have passed in Tulsa. In Tulsa, if one of these issues is implicated, you can pick up the phone and call 311 and reach out to the compliance officer to report this issue. You can also report online for the city of Tulsa. For the other municipalities, I would recommend going online and seeing what sort of what their referral or reporting process looks like. For all the reasons you can imagine, after everything that we've been talking about so far, a lot of people don't want to be here. 68% of LGBTQ youth in Oklahoma considered leaving the state, and 73% of trans youth. This was from 2024. So again, I imagine that this has increased. Also, I would go out on a limb and say that 100% of LGBTQ plus people in Oklahoma who are out or who have come out to themselves have considered leaving Oklahoma. Um, it's hard to imagine that the thought hasn't at least crossed your mind when you are being inundated with all of the challenges, concerns, and stigma that we've talked about today. However, many people have stayed. Many people cannot afford to leave. Many have chosen to resist. And many people have communities and families and jobs and lives here. Then they're deeply rooted and they don't want to leave and they shouldn't have to. Um, if we all leave, who's left here to fight for those who can't? Someone has to be here to somehow bring some sense of safety to the community. And this really is where you come in and we come in, because for those of us who are here, we do play an incredible role. You are a variable in the model, and this is one of the biggest things I also want you to take away. We're about halfway done, or let's see how much we're doing on time. Yeah, about halfway done, and we only have a few more slides left, so we'll have some time at the end. But I want to kind of shift gears and focus on your role specifically now as a community legal as a navigator. But first, research demonstrates that LGBTQ plus youth who have at least one accepting adult in their lives are 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year. That's wild to me, and I think this is such an incredible point that is a positive piece of data. So we've looked at a lot of really bad, sad, horrible things today, as it relates to people's well-being and mental health, but this is changeable, and suicidality risk is can be reduced when there's people showing up in their lives that are accepting. I wish I had people like people in this room growing up who were openly, explicitly affirming of LGBTQ plus people. The way I grew up, that wasn't really around. I maybe saw it online a couple times, but other than that, I had no exposure to accepting adults. And that's just the unfortunate reality for me and so many other people who grew up here and are growing up here now. So each of you, as a navigator, has the capacity to be either a compounding stressor or a protective factor. Every time a client is navigating the systems that we've brought up today, they are being faced again with potential trauma that is building upon itself by being structurally excluded and discriminated against, and the constant awareness of that disenfranchisement, or that there are people here that accept them, recognize them, are fighting for them, and are affirming their humanity and dignity as they're navigating these systems. Yes, you cannot, as one person or even as a group, change the structural realities in our state right now, but you can be the person in this cog that reminds people that they're not alone and not contribute to some of those challenges, um, and empower people and handing them the tools to protect themselves. So here's a practical navigator checklist. I will go through this. This isn't perfect. It's not totally comprehensive. Also, if other people here have ideas of additional ways to support people, I'd love to hear it or drop in the chat. Um, and then I will get to those questions in the chat too. First, affirm. Let clients know that they are seen, worthy of protection, not alone, and deserving of a full and healthy life. As we heard from one of the quotes earlier, there wasn't a lot of hope that people are feeling from the political and legislative climate. And so remind people that there is hope, that when we do look at the long arc of equality in this state, that in a lot of way in the country broadly, a lot of things have gotten better. So there are, we can still get married. Um, for now, there are still ways in which we can move through the world without violence and discrimination. And there is still half of the state or more maybe that is supportive. So even if the legislature does not show those signs, there are people here that are supportive, and we can show that. Respect chosen names and pronouns, just like you would anyone else. Don't wait for disclosure. This one's important because you just don't know. So if the issue touches any of these issues, housing, employment, family, healthcare, consider its relevance to LGBTQ plus people without having to make the client raise it first and out themselves. Um, some people just don't want to or don't feel safe, and that's fair. So research and don't make clients educate you. If you need some understanding on an experience or an identity or whatever it is, Google's in your pocket. Give people the benefit of the doubt, which I don't need to, you all know this. Clients are under complex and layered stress. It's hard economically in so many ways. Verify referrals first. When in doubt, refer to LGBTQ plus specific organizations. Protect confidentiality, protect confidentiality, protect confidentiality, including identity. Every step of the way, protect confidentiality. Know your resources, especially crisis hotlines, and I have a list of phone numbers we'll look at next. Treat LGBTQ plus needs as routine, same as everybody else, but fewer protections and more challenges and obstacles. And competence is care. Again, you are a variable in the model. You can be that compounding stressor or protective factor, and you may never know the extent of the impact that you have by just showing up. We talked about some of the federal actions that have been taken. Because of that, the referral landscape has very much changed, especially as it relates to enforcement of certain types of discrimination at the federal level. Um, I'm not sure how all this might show up in your work, but for example, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission processing workplace discrimination complaints or the Office of Civil Rights are no longer enforcing protections based on gender identity in the way that they were before. And so while Bostock, the law protected offering protections in employment, it's not being enforced at the federal level in the same way. Just because these avenues are restricted doesn't mean there may not be a reason to pursue them and exhaust those remedies, legalese for say. In other words, you still should refer out as soon as possible to these specific legal and social organizations if you do catch wind of a client facing discrimination to ensure that every possible remedy is explored there. So, some practical referral options. I cannot highlight this enough. Just pick up the phone. If you can avoid the email route first and just call and get some information, find the person to talk to, get some support, I just 10 out of 10 recommend pick up the phone first. The first two organizations here, Oklahomans for Equality and Freedom Oklahoma, are two statewide LGBTQ plus serving organizations that have both offered to be resources to support your referrals. So, two phone numbers there, super important. If you don't know, have a question. They also have resources on their websites, everything from affirming mental health therapists to churches and businesses and faith communities, etc. These are two organizations that can help you there as well as other organizations in the state. The health clinic at Oklahomans for Equality, based in Tulsa, has also offered to be a resource for healthcare questions. Of course, several, if not a dozen, of the policy issues we talked today do impact healthcare for transgender people. And so, if you have any specific questions there, that's a resource. For youth, Youth Services of Tulsa is great. So that's Tulsa specific. I'm sure there's many in Oklahoma City too that you can quickly find. PFLAG chapters for parents, incredible social support network. There's chapters all over the state, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Enid, Edmond, others. So definitely find those websites and reach out to anybody on there. They'd love to help you. Legal Aid Services of Oklahoma, as you know, for statewide legal support. There's also a national hotline for the National Center for LGBTQ plus rights and the Oklahoma LGBTQ plus Bar Association. Here's an email too. If you've made any of these calls, are still looking for legal support, a referral for a lawyer, or just have another question, this is also a line we have. I'm a part of this association. We are trying to develop this referral network. So happy to be a resource as well there. Crisis hotlines, great to know. You probably already do. 988 is the mental health crisis hotline in Oklahoma for LGBTQ plus youth. Trevor Project is a resource, and for trans youth and adults, Trans Lifeline is another resource. So again, just pick up the phone and also call me, you know, happy to help. Kind of ending reminder, let trans people know that they are seen, validated, worthy of equal protection and human rights, that people are fighting for them, both queer people and allies, that they are not alone, and we won't give up fighting to make things better for queer youth, adults, and families. Trans people deserve to live a healthy and happy life with access to have all of their needs met. Have a resource list ready for those who may need it. This is a friend and member of House Church Tulsa, LGBTQ plus advocate, who wanted to share this reminder. And a lot of queer people are living in a very hostile environment in Oklahoma. But if you scale down to the micro, what are their homes like, their schools, their places of employment? If we can make these spaces more affirming, that goes such a long way. This is a quote from Haley Briggs, Executive Director at Oklahomans for Equality. Cannot agree enough. You do have such an incredible impact, as the research showed, to change somebody's life for the better by just making it a little bit better day by day in the interactions that people have. So, never forget you are a variable in the model. You can change these disparities one step at a time. So, thank you for listening. That is it for me. And I do see some questions in the chat. And so I will jump in there and feel free to keep them coming. Question: Are there any bright spots about future legislation we need to know about with LGBTQ plus laws? I mentioned in the city of Tulsa, there have been efforts for about 50 years, over 50 years, to pass more inclusive non-discrimination protections, specifically in public accommodations. That those efforts continued as recently as a couple years ago at the city of Tulsa City Council. They did not go to a vote, so there are certainly opportunities for change at the local level. If folks are interested in advocacy, connecting with municipalities, lawmakers, there's always bright spots about future potential for inclusive policies, especially at the local level. So I would say that that is optimistic. Um, really honest, at the state level, I've not heard of any besides potential decriminalization for HIV. We have extremely antiquated laws still in Oklahoma that is not helpful for anybody. So decriminalization bills is something, and then the Equality Act at the federal level, which is faces an uphill battle. But in Oklahoma, it's a hard answer, unfortunately. Um, Also, in the chat, there is a podcast episode I want everyone to check out for this month with Haley and Leslie Briggs. Uh, that was just dropped. Two questions more. What was the key or final piece to get the municipalities with housing protections to enact these local laws? And what is the one thing agencies could do now to improve outcomes for LGBTQ plus program participants? The times have changed a lot in the last couple of years, as this whole presentation described. Those laws passed in 2015, I think, a few years ago. So before a lot of this, and I'm blanking if anyone wants to fact check me. It might have been 2019, the housing protections, but it's been a few years, and they passed unanimously in the city of Tulsa for housing protections. I think that there was some trends taking place nationally, and otherwise that made it seem it was just the right thing to do. Is it still the right thing to do? Yes. Are people more hesitant? Yes. The federal backlash toward non-discrimination and the lack of enforcement obviously is causing those to reach standstills. One thing agencies could do now to improve outcomes for LGBTQ plus program participants. I think everything on the referral sort of checklist is relevant. Be explicitly supportive. I think there's been such a lot more silence around these topics. You know, corporations are not going out on a limb talking about pride right now. Um, there's so much fear, and I think anything you can do to reduce the fear, remind people they're not alone, remind people that these programs and support systems and organizations exist is incredibly important right now. So I cannot stress that enough. I think the visibility is incredibly important. And then access to mental health care. If your organization has access to affirming mental health therapists that have been trained with cultural competency training around serving trans and queer youth and adults, I think making sure that people are getting the care that they need and then referring people out when they don't have access to the care. Any other questions? What does can explicit support look like both on an organizational level and one-on-one? How can we create welcoming environments that make people feel comfortable being their whole selves? You know, this is hard because, yes, there's so much retaliation and challenges right now. I think just like talking about pride, highlighting non-traditional families and clients and people and ensuring that there is representation in your organizations of LGBTQ plus people, that they don't feel like that they have to hide who they are for being queer or trans, that they're in leadership, that decision-making tables, that there are signs of social safety at your organization and in the places that you're going. So whether that's just a small pride flag in your at your desk, these little signs of social safety cues can go a long way with helping people feel a more regulated, calm nervous system. So they're not walking into a new place or space and just feeling like they're on edge and looking over their shoulder if it's a safe space, that they can see something and know immediately that they are in a same safe space. And that does help them feel more comfortable. So social safety cues, yes. And if anyone else has ideas in the chat, I'm a one-man show up here, so please jump in and bring other ideas too. Any other questions? I think I will happy to move along, give you 15 minutes back if you want. I'll also just leave on one note, which is, oh yes, I think being the first person to offer pronouns can be helpful too, and just that respect across the board. Any way in which you can inspire hope that things will get better, that there are communities, networks of people working together on these issues to support these communities, reminds people over and over again that they're here. So thank you. Tiffany, anything you'd like to add?
I think you did an amazing job. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm having technical difficulties today, but you did a fantastic job. I absolutely love the practical navigator checklist. It's very practical. It's very helpful. Um, and I think that you've given everyone an opportunity to ask questions, and they were very engaged. And don't be discouraged by the small live participation. Like I said, it will be archived and a resource for all for as long as it's on the internet, right? But you did a great job, and you'll continue to be invited to our sessions now that you've been a speaker. And I just have a couple of announcements for our community, and I love that emphasis also. What struck me is when you talked about the spaces that are closest, the community of it, that's where they feel the safest. And that's where we make it's as you just get bigger and bigger, that's where I guess all the danger is, all the threats. And I mean, that's where we're trying to make a difference ultimately by working upstream. But as long as we and our communities continue to embrace and make everyone feel safe, we can make a big difference. And I also, I'm going to cross-reference all of your resources with the resources that we offer on the website associated with our training and our community legal navigator support our program to see if we can incorporate those into that website. So thank you for all of that. You did a fabulous job again. And so community, just a couple of announcements. We are offering a bonus training event this summer. We are going to be in Tulsa on July 22nd and in Oklahoma City on July 29th. If we have some very high interest, but very small groups that are not making a full class. So if you know of anyone who's interested in training in July, please reach out and let me know. Also save the date for our next 201 session on July 23rd at noon. Other than that, that's all I have for us today. And thanks again to our featured speaker. You're very welcome. Yes, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. You have about 11 minutes back of your lunch. Thank
Thank you
you.
all so much. Happy Pride.
You too.